This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by my book, Anti-Diet, Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is available now wherever books are sold. Just go to christyharrison.com/book to get it. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and author of the book Anti-Diet. Join me here every week as I talk with fellow anti-diet advocates about their journeys toward peace with food and their bodies. And by the way, on this show, we bleep out diet culture stuff like weight and calorie numbers, but we don't censor swear words or other adult language, so listener discretion is advised. The following episode is a fan favorite from the Food Psych archives. We're taking a summer hiatus to rest, restore, and get ready to make our 8th year of this podcast the best one yet. We'll be back on September 7th for the Season 8 premiere, and meanwhile, I hope you'll enjoy revisiting this classic episode or hearing it for the first time if you're new to the show. Anti-diet revolution. We're for health at every size. Eat the foods you like. Food Psych. Hey there, welcome to episode 169 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with Christine Yoshida, a mental health counselor and certified intuitive eating counselor who also has a background as a personal trainer. She joins us to discuss how fitness culture affected her relationship with food and her body, why the diet mentality and quote-unquote clean eating can make health problems worse, how young children can be influenced by diet culture, using empathy and connection to spread the anti-diet message, and so much more. I can't wait to share our conversation with you in just a moment. But first, I'll answer this week's listener question, which is from a listener who gives their name as Black and White Thinker, who writes, I'm entering recovery from severe long-term disordered eating. I was listening to one of your podcast episodes where a certain topic came up to which I could really relate. I can identify in myself that I think in very black and white terms and have many food rules around eating. I find that my personality type tends to jump from thing to thing and try to find comfort every single time I try to give up the disordered eating. I feel as though the disordered eating is all I do most days. I'm wondering what you would suggest for someone like me who on the one hand wants to go all in and admit to the world that I've been living with this alone, apart from my husband now knowing for years, and need to enter recovery by exposing it. But on the other hand, I'm scared that this is part of my black and white thinking and false expectations about recovery. Or to put it another way, once I became liberated by hearing about health at every size, particularly gaining knowledge on the physiology of eating disorders, I've become very obsessive about the physiology and the factual information on eating disorders, so have begun to look into studying human biology and sociology. I then have to stop myself and ask, is this part of your all or nothing thinking? Like if I'm going to live with recovery, that I want to read all the books and know about everything to do with eating disorders. I feel as though my life is wasting away and I'm missing everything, yet the disordered eating won't piss off. Basically, I'm wondering if being a black and white thinker can be a good thing. Like becoming an advocate for health at every size or telling myself that I'm okay with eating whatever I want. Can that be a way to look at it? My husband identified that I have a loyal, dedicated personality and morals, which I feel is okay if I can put them to good use, by going all in to beat this disordered eating and helping others too. What are your thoughts? Thank you. So thanks so much for that great question. And before I answer, just my standard disclaimer that these answers and this podcast in general are for informational and educational purposes only and aren't a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice. Yeah, so this is such a great question and there are so many layers to it. So I'm going to try to answer it in a lot of shades of gray, actually. So first of all, black and white thinking is so common in disordered eating, so you're not alone. The disordered mindset is very rule-oriented and regimented and all or nothing. And the physiological changes that disordered eating creates and the psychological changes that it creates can actually exacerbate that rigidity. So if you have an underlying tendency to be sort of all or nothing already, and that might contribute to the development of disordered eating, and then the physiological changes and psychological changes that happen to you with disordered eating can just make that problem that much more entrenched, make that way of thinking that much more difficult to get out of. And diet culture in general really operates on a black and white dichotomy too. It's good or it's bad, it's right or it's wrong, like how you're eating is correct or incorrect. And diet culture really insists that one way of eating and exercising is quote unquote success, while the other way, or a way that differs from whatever the diet du jour is telling you to do, is quote unquote failure. And of course, that leaves no room for what actually feels good to you, right? And that's how people end up getting so disconnected from their internal wisdom, that natural intuitive eating skill that we were all born with. Diet culture's black and white way of seeing things comes into play and disconnects us from what really feels good. Because if we're constantly being told that avoiding a certain food or nutrient is quote unquote good, and that's the way to have quote unquote success, but we really want that food or nutrient, then suddenly we're at odds with our desires. What we're being told is good is at odds with what we actually want, what we actually might feel good doing for ourselves. And so this way of thinking, that diet culture really exacerbates is harmful to us, but it can be hard to let go of those rules and that black and white way of seeing food, especially, in good and bad categories, healthy and unhealthy, because those rules feel so concrete, right? They feel like a sure thing. They can make you feel okay and certain in a world of uncertainty. And it's hard and uncomfortable to sit with uncertainty. So of course we want things that make us feel more secure. But the thing to keep in mind is that this security that diet culture supposedly gives us is only temporary. It's really a false sense of security. And the uncertainty that comes with recovery is uncomfortable, yes, and we have to learn to tolerate that discomfort, and that can be challenging. That's a part of recovery, really. But being able to sit with that uncertainty really ultimately opens up so many more doors, including the path to true peace with food in your body. That's what happens, that's what comes out of recovery if you can stick with it. And if you can sit through that discomfort of not knowing and not having the quote unquote rules to follow. So in terms of throwing yourself into recovery, I would say that in some ways that can definitely be a good thing, like especially if you channel it into getting into treatment so that you can heal. And opening up to treatment providers like therapists and dietitians who are experienced with eating disorders and experienced with health at every size is an excellent way to channel that desire to go full speed ahead into recovery and to open up about it, I wouldn't necessarily go shouting it from the rooftops to everyone else in your life just yet, though, because sometimes having to deal with other people's reactions to what you say, like reactions to sharing that you have this longstanding eating disorder, can actually hold you back in recovery because people can say some pretty triggering shit. So it's great that you've told your husband. That's awesome. And if you have a few other close people in your life whom you feel comfortable and safe telling, then that's great too. But I would just be judicious about who you tell, because sometimes people's reactions can actually be problematic and unhelpful and make it harder for you to recover. So now in terms of throwing yourself into studying eating disorders and all this information that you're devouring, I would also proceed with caution here and make sure that you're looking at content that's helpful and not triggering. And I can tell you, as a creator of content to help people in recovery, I do a lot behind the scenes to make sure everything I'm sharing is as safe as possible, like bleeping out weight and calorie numbers, as you've probably heard if you listened to the podcast before. I edit out statements that could be misinterpreted or that aren't appropriate for people in early stages of recovery. So if one of my guests says something sort of off the cuff that I'm like, that's a little bit potentially triggering, I'll take it out. And I know that not everyone who produces recovery-oriented content is anywhere near that careful. And there are a lot of supposed recovery resources out there, like websites and books and YouTube videos and social media channels and even other podcasts that can actually kick your disordered thinking up a notch and give you harmful ideas of new disordered behaviors to try, or make you feel like you're not sick enough, quote unquote, to deserve care, or lots of other harmful outcomes from potential triggers that are out there. So I would love to recommend a resource list that I can guarantee isn't going to be triggering, but honestly, I don't think that's possible because triggers can often be very individual, and also they're so rampant in the resources that are out there. So I think the best way to find content that you trust and content that feels okay to you is to pay attention to how you feel when you're consuming it and notice whether it's giving you inspiration and stoking the fire of your recovery and getting you in a place where you're like, yeah, fuck diet culture. Look at all the ways that it's harming us. I'm ready to change. I'm ready to recover. Like, let's do this. And if that's the case, then that's the mark of content that's actually helpful to you because it's channeling your tenacious spirit in a direction of recovery. And that's awesome. But if you notice that the content you're consuming is putting you in a headspace that feels spinny, that's like the best way I can describe it, where it's like you're just spinning around in your head, where you're like, this person just said that they ate X calories and did Y hours of exercise, but I only ever eat Z calories and do B hours of exercise. So maybe I should just do what they say and then I'll be okay. Like if you get into that place where you're feeling really stuck on little details and thinking you should go back to disordered eating behaviors for just one more try before you go into recovery, that's a sign that you're being triggered and maybe it's time to step away from that content. And of course, there can be content that's mostly helpful but somewhat triggering, or mostly triggering but somewhat helpful, and any mix in between. So just notice how the content you're consuming is affecting your mood and try to make self-care decisions based on that. If you notice you're getting into that spinny place where you're really in your head and hung up on details, and that happens over and over again with a particular type of content, maybe don't consume that content anymore, And I say this because when you say you're getting into the physiology and biology of it, some of that content can definitely be very triggering because it gets into numbers and how the body works. And depending on where you're at in your recovery, you could be trying to game the system or trying to figure out, like, there's a part of you maybe that's still trying to figure out the best way to do disordered eating, how to be a better disordered eater. So check in with yourself about that, check in with yourself and be honest with yourself. If there's a part of you that's looking to that content as a way to try to master disordered eating as opposed to a way to truly recover. And if that's the case, and it usually is for most people in early recovery, maybe try to take those pieces of content off the table and just consume things that make you feel really inspired to recover without the spinny feeling. Now, in terms of whether being a black and white thinker can be a good thing, I think the term black and white thinking generally has negative connotations in our society at this point in time. But what you're talking about, where your husband identified that you have a really loyal, dedicated personality and morals, I think those are actually wonderful qualities and they can definitely be a huge asset in your recovery. So apply that dedication, apply that loyalty to yourself and your recovery. And I think it's just important to remember that when you dedicate yourself to healing from your eating disorder, you're not fighting against yourself. You need to have compassion for yourself when it's inevitably harder and less straightforward to recovery than you want it to be. I don't know if you've seen that picture where it's like expectations of recovery. It's a straight line pointing kind of upward at a diagonal. And then it's like reality of recovery. And it's a squiggly line that's all over the place with lots of ups and downs. And yes, it ends up moving in this sort of upward motion as well, but it takes a lot more ups and downs to get there. So, make sure to apply that loyalty and dedication to yourself, be your own friend, be your own compassionate advocate in recovery, which means that when you have slip-ups where you fall back into a disordered behavior, you don't beat yourself up. Instead, you're there for yourself like a loyal friend. You comfort yourself, you ask yourself what you need, you give yourself some perspective each and every time. You show up for yourself. And I want to say that even learning how to do that, even learning how to practice self-compassion like that is a huge step. And it's one that took me years of therapy to be able to do consistently. And I know takes many of my clients years as well to implement in their life in a consistent way. So don't beat yourself up over not practicing self-compassion, quote unquote, perfectly either, because it's a journey, it's all a journey. And like I said before, I would really recommend finding a good therapist who can support you through this and through the other aspects of your recovery, and also finding a dietitian who can help you with the food piece of recovery and help you break through those food rules. So you can look at HAEScommunity.com, that's HAES community.com, and search the registry for referrals. And also go to intuitiveeating.org and check out the certified counselors directory there. Those are two good places to look for providers because, in general, they're probably going to be a little more aware of diet culture and weight stigma and the pitfalls of those things in recovery from an eating disorder. And I know it's an investment to do therapy and nutrition counseling for eating disorder recovery. I get it, believe me, but if you can swing it financially, including perhaps finding someone who's able to do a sliding scale, and those providers are out there, and if you find a treatment team you really click with, it is one of the best investments you can make because it's an investment in your recovery, it's an investment in your future, and really your happiness. And then on a related note, although this is not directly an answer to your question, I just want to circle back to this idea that the term black and white thinking has negative connotations at this point in history, because I've been seeing some comments here and there on social media and around the internet lately that accuse the health at every size and intuitive eating movements of being caught up in black and white thinking, especially when we're talking about the harms of diet culture and weight stigma. And I think it's because our approach feels like a very stark difference from the diety approach to nutrition and health that people are used to, because we live in diet culture and that's what's all around us. So yeah, health at every size and intuitive eating feel like a radical departure and maybe as contrasting as black and white. But I also think that people characterize this approach as black and white as a way to dismiss it. And that's actually a form of tone policing that's used by members of a dominant group, in this case, diet culture, who aren't able to sit with the discomfort of looking at the harm that their own behaviors have caused or the harm of buying into a paradigm that they're really invested in. And we know that there are millions of people who are super invested in diet culture because they've spent so much time and money and energy devoted to shrinking their bodies or eating quote unquote perfectly, and they're just not ready to give that up yet. And so I find that people love to demand quote unquote nuance in conversations about intuitive eating and health at every size, but don't actually love to hear the nuance when it comes to challenging the status quo, the weight stigma and diet culture that runs rampant in our society. And of course, if you've listened to this podcast and delved into other resources on intuitive eating and health at every size, you know that there's a ton of nuance to all of this, to healing your relationship with food and not falling back into the diet trap. And it's not like you just flip a switch and you're an intuitive eater, you're done with diet culture. Like there's a ton to unpack and explore and unlearn, and it is all very nuanced. So I just wanted to highlight that as a way to say that if you do come across people characterizing this movement as black and white thinking, quote unquote, which is kind of a new maybe trend, I don't know, I've seen it a few times, but it's worth just asking yourself what the person stands to gain from that characterization and who benefits, and odds are it benefits the status quo to dismiss concerns about how weight bias and diet culture harm people's relationships with food and their lives. It benefits the status quo to dismiss all of that as black and white thinking. And these are matters of social justice, and there are always going to be people who are uncomfortable with change, who try to maintain the status quo by cutting down and mischaracterizing the people who are fighting for justice. That's happened in pretty much every social justice movement in history that I can think of. But if you're here listening, I know you know how harmful dieting and stigmatizing larger bodies are for people's mental and physical health. I know you know that. I know you've probably had a lived experience of the harms of those things. So trust in that knowledge, trust in your own intuition, your own experience, and explore this new paradigm that does feel like such a radical contrast from the status quo without listening to the haters who just want to dismiss this all so that they don't have to change. So to submit your own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, go to christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions. And then if you want to not have to wait so long for my answers to help you master intuitive eating and break free from diet culture, come check out my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. It has an exclusive monthly Q&A podcast that has answers to hundreds of questions already. And when you join the course, you get to listen to all of those, which aren't available anywhere else. Plus, you get your own questions answered in a new episode every month. So if you're ready to join a great community of people working to break free from diet culture and supporting each other in that effort, you can learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. We're brought to you today by Paribus. Stop deleting your emails. You heard me. Mass deleting your junk mail could actually be costing you money. If you're intrigued, Our secret weapon here at Food Psych HQ is Paribus, a tool that gets you money back. It's 100% free to sign up, and customers keep 100% of the savings. There's no hidden fees or costs. And once you sign up, Paribus will scan your emails for receipts, finding refunds that you're owed from online stores, and making it easy for you to save money. If it discovers you've bought something online from one of the retailers it monitors, it'll track the item's price and help you get a refund when the price drops. Paribus monitors online stores like Target, Gap, Old Navy, Nordstrom, Best Buy, and lots more. Sound too good to be true? Well, there's more. If your guaranteed shipment from select online retailers shows up late, even that 2-day one, Paribus will help you get compensated. Head to getparibus.com to sign up. That's GETPARIBUS.com to sign up now. This episode is also brought to you by Zero. For any smokers out there trying to quit, or if you know someone who is, there's a revolutionary new way to do it called Zero. Zero's Quit Kit is a new quitting solution proven to increase your chances of kicking the habit by up to 4 times compared to going cold turkey. And if you know anyone who's tried to go cold turkey, like a good friend of mine who tried to quit smoking more than 10 times before he was successful, you know that going cold turkey doesn't really do it, And this guy tried to white knuckle it most of those times and used a lot of self-shaming. And of course, that didn't work. And it wasn't until he finally got some help that he was able to do it in a more self-compassionate way and finally have it stick. So the Zero Quit Kit is a really great way to quit smoking because it's a 3-tiered approach that includes a prescription medication, nicotine gum, and continued support through a mobile app. So you just go to quitwithzero.com/foodpsych to start your online doctor visit. And after your 5-minute visit, a physician will then determine if you're eligible to use the Quit Kit. If you are, the doctor will prescribe your medication and the Quit Kit will be shipped directly to your door. Zero costs less than what the average smoker spends on cigarettes and less than most other quitting options. The Zero Quit Kit is normally $129 a month, but for a limited time, my listeners can get their first month for only $79. Go to quitwithzero.com/foodpsych to quit smoking now. That's quitwithzero.com/FOODPSYCH. And now, without any further ado, let's go talk to Christine Yoshida. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
I love this question, and I love the responses I've heard from your other people on your podcast, and I can empathize so much with others and also feel pain for those of some people on the podcast that I might not have had the same experience. Me personally, I feel really, honestly grateful for my childhood. I really had, food was really in abundance for us. I grew up in a Hispanic, side of my family, my mom's side, and then my dad's side was Italian and Scottish. And food was just how we got together. It was how we socialized. I grew up actually poor, but I wouldn't have known it as a kid. If we didn't have enough food, I didn't know it. I just know that there was times, I know now as an adult, that we would go to my relative's house and eat, or our family would buy each other groceries and stuff like that. But other than that, I just remember the holidays and barbecuing. We were always with our family, and because my mom was the youngest of 9, actually, and so there's a lot of relatives around in California. So that was, as a child, a really great experience.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you had like the family support where even if you were struggling financially, you wouldn't have known it because you were able to rely on family members.
For sure. And then I even lived with some of my family members as a kid, but then my dad got, a better job as we got older, and we ended up moving across to Washington. And at that time we changed from low SES to more middle upper class. And still then food was in abundance. But I remember that's when we had like all the kind of foods that maybe I didn't have. I just remember we were a family, there was no moral obligation with food. We had honestly all brands, all sugary soda. There was like no kind of off limits. Our cupboards were always full with like different types of food. And we were actually like the house that like the kids always came to. And I remember my friends being obsessed with the cupboard, like, oh my gosh, fruit roll-ups and all this different stuff. And I was like, yeah. And our cupboards were never closed. It was just eat what you want to, and ice cream and other, different nutrition type of food. It was just all food was kind of legal.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting, like the other kids, I've heard that experience so much from people. And I wonder if I was that house for some kids growing up and just didn't know it. But the kids who are restricted of foods at home and they go to the kid's house that has all the fun foods that where it's not a big deal and you're allowed to take whatever you want from the cupboards. It's like those kids who are restricted get so kind of obsessed that they're like, ooh, gotta eat all this, while I'm here.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you never had any of that, which is nice.
Yeah, not as a kid. I mean, I could now looking back at my friends, I could see that similar to maybe what you experienced.
Yeah, I mean, my family was very much like that. Like what you're describing too, actually was, had a lot of fun foods and snacks and all of those things around and never any prescriptions or restrictions on it. But I think some of my friends definitely had like dieting parents and it was like all, low fat or fat free foods at their house. And I remember being like, oh, this is weird. This food is different. I still ate it. I still enjoyed it. But it was like a different, I was sort of curious as to why they didn't have the stuff that I had. Like, where are the Gushers? Where are the Oreos? Where are the Chips Ahoy?
The sour Gushers.
So good.
Yeah. So good.
So it sounds like your family wasn't like healthist at all when you were growing up.
No, not at all. I mean, I want to acknowledge I do, I think I have a lot of privilege personally. And so I might not have received the same messages maybe my other families had about like finishing their food or stop eating certain food. I think there's like a wide range of body sizes in my family, like most people. And I just was very naive to a lot of things. But looking back, I feel like my other relatives might have had a different experience than me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So they got sort of diet culture messages about their body size, whereas you didn't.
Yeah. I mean, I was a kid, like I was very, very active. And so it was more like with sports, like telling me to eat more, like doctors telling my parents I need to eat, adult sized meal at McDonald's versus a cheeseburger, because I was just so active. That was my experience with food and kind of being told as a child.
So it sounds like your relationship with food then was pretty intuitive, like you were left alone for the most part, other than to say like, hey, eat more, which is such a rarity in diet culture.
Yeah. And even if that was so, like, it wasn't pressure to go beyond like what I felt comfortable with, it was just eating more like palatable foods, like stuff that she knew I would like, that she would get more for me. But yeah, it was very intuitive. I'm so, again, grateful that I had that growing up.
And how did things unfold for you then as time went on? Did you continue to have that intuitive relationship with food all throughout childhood and adolescence, or did it start to get murkier at some point?
Yeah. I mean, again, like with food, and I didn't connect it to my body or size at all. Except for like this one experience. I was playing volleyball in high school. It was like the end of my season and the coach like lined us up and pointed to people, you need to lose weight and you need to gain weight.
Oof.
I know, right?
Yikes.
So awful. Oh,
it's terrible.
So awful. And I was like, well, what about me? And they're like, well, you can't lose or gain and you need to be careful.
Oof.
And then I think I started getting those messages like, oh, being in a larger body is not okay. And then I know messages in my family, because some of my family members are in a larger body, like that was kind of, even though it wasn't like told I need to change my body, there were still messages like that's not okay to be in a larger body. So that was there. So that was like one experience in high school, which is so awful, even saying it out loud. Oh my gosh, I hope that they never do that again.
Yeah. It sounds like that person, that coach, had a really disordered thing going on themselves.
Yeah. Could you imagine?
Ugh.
Just insane. It's awful. Then like in high school, it kind of started changing. I started again, that was just one experience. And then my senior year in high school, I started dating a guy who was really into bodybuilding. And that's when I was like, oh, and he ate way over. He was trying to put on like so much muscle mass. So he was eating way beyond his fullness and trying to like see why he was doing that. And I was kind of learning about that separate world. It was like my first dip in the water with fitness culture.
And it's such a disordered world, that bodybuilding world.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And even from then, like there was no pressure. I just remember seeing that. And just more of these like little experiences kind of like get, unconsciously in your brain, like, oh, that's what people find attractive, or that's what we should be doing with our bodies or with our food. But then like in college, I I really still had a pretty normal relationship with food. And then I don't know what happened. I really have sat on this since I decided to be on your podcast. When did this happen? Like, how did this happen? I started Weight Watchers after my freshman year in college. And I was like, oh, why? Who told me this? And I don't know anybody, but that was like my first real diet. I think that's really common. I hear it now. I thought it was just me, but now listening to other people tell their stories, it seems pretty common, which is, again, awful.
Yeah, it's such a gateway diet for a lot of people.
Such a gateway diet. And that experience was, I think, as college can be a really hard time. At least it was for me. I had so much fun, but it was also super stressful academically. And I think it was, looking back now, as a way to kind of like, oh, I have this under control, with the points or whatever their system was at the time. I remember going to the meetings and people just looking at me like, why you're here? And still having this need to change my body.
Wow. So yeah, it sounds like it was sort of just a weird fluke that you ended up there. Like nobody told you to do it. Do you know what spurred that decision?
I'm not really sure how I got like guided to go to Weight Watchers. I just think I'm imagining I was going home in the summer and I drove past their little building, they had like sign Weight Watchers, and I was into the gym too. So I'm sure that was a big part of it. Actually, that's a big part of it. People in the gym, because I worked at a gym in college in the summers, I'd go home. And that's probably so much where I heard it. Like people were doing all these different diets. And I must have heard it from somebody from there, one of the, people at the gym. And it was just, when I found it, it was very much, it gets you.
Yeah, it sucks you right in.
Yeah, it totally sucked me in. And then like the accolades you get afterwards when you start losing some weight, and then it just kind of perpetuates and just kind of sucks you in.
What was that like working at a gym in college? Like, how did you decide to do that? And it sounds like the fitness culture there, AKA diet culture under another guise, was very rampant and caused you to do some things to manipulate your body size and change your eating. But I'm sure there was a lot of other stuff going on there too in terms of diet culture beliefs. So what was that like, and how did you kind of end up there in the first place?
Well, I think at that time it was still under the umbrella, and that at that particular time was just eating less. It was the motto, and exercising more. And I think the bodybuilding world at that time was very clean eating, quote unquote clean eating, eating only particular foods, different times. Being at the gym, it just kind of made me realize it was less about manipulating my food. It was more about eating less at the time, and then trying to work out to compensate if you don't follow your plan or something. It wasn't really at that time for me about manipulating to change my body to different ways, like body composition, how it kind of evolved for me as I got older.
So you were kind of sucked into the bodybuilding world, it sounds like.
Yeah, later. I mean, that was more after college, because the Weight Watchers really was like the beginning of that led to more of my eating disorder behavior. Because I think after so long, like I hear like, so it seems so easy, right? Your first diet. And then it's like, oh, well, I get this amount of points. Well, I can eat less points. And it was very much, I was the only one who was doing it in my little world with my friends. So it was just kind of like my own little game in a way, a horrible game. And then it just, after so long, you can only do restriction. It doesn't last. You can only handle it so much. And so then it led to, I think I did Weight Watchers on and off for like a year or two. And then it led to like a full-blown eating disorder, because it's just that's what I think it led to more. I didn't realize it until now. It was more like the restriction and a lot of subjective compensatory behaviors after that.
Yeah. And that's such a common thing, I think, for a lot of people. They start with the diet and chase that high from the first diet and try to go lower and lower with the calories or the points or whatever it is. And all that restriction just can't last. And so it kind of spirals into some sort of disordered behavior, whatever that is, whatever that looks like for a particular person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that just led to so much more physical things that I didn't know at the time were associated with the restricting and over exercising and different things like that. I mean, during that time, it was only, a short period of time, but going to doctors all the time. And that's why I love, like, some people really getting into the medical world and trying to advocate health at every size and intuitive eating. Cause I wish so much, like, all those doctor visits for years, someone would have asked me, what are you eating? How is your relationship like with your food? How is your exercise and different things like that? It's just so many times I feel like it's missed. Like, oh,
I know. I feel you on that. That is exactly what I wish for myself when I was younger
really?
too. Oh yeah, I had a very similar trajectory where I started out trying to lose weight that I had gained on a birth control pill, and I'd had thin privilege and intuitive eating all up until I was 20. But I had, of course, grown up in diet culture, so I was hearing all these terrible things about people in larger bodies and was like, well, thank God I don't have to deal with that. That was sort of my attitude, was just like, well, I can eat whatever I want, and everybody tells me that because I'm thin, but no, if I ever gained weight or something, I would have to do something about it. I think this was my unconscious belief. I didn't really ever articulate it like that, but looking back, I can see that that's how I saw things. And then when I was 20 and I gained weight from a birth control pill, I was like, oh my God, it's happening. I have to lose weight. What do I do? And I went down this like early internet rabbit hole of like searching for, just like the worst, terrible ideas, which have only gotten worse as the internet has grown, of course. It's like,
right.
But at the time it was like Atkins and low carb and all this nonsense. And so I kind of fell down that rabbit hole and then started having health problems because of the restriction as well. And then went to all these doctors and was like, why don't I have my period? What's wrong with me? Could it be my thyroid? Which turns out I did end up having a thyroid condition, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but I was diagnosed with that later. And there's some evidence that there's a lot of evidence that eating disorders can cause thyroid dysfunction, cause low thyroid, and also that they might even either trigger Hashimoto's or sort of masquerade as Hashimoto's, but actually there's something going on with the body that makes the thyroid attack itself when you're starving. And so, it would have really been nice to know that. And for people to say, for doctors to say like, hey, it looks like something's up with your thyroid. Can we talk about are you dieting? Are you eating enough? Are you over-exercising? Like, what's your relationship with food and your body like? And instead it was like, well, your weight's not too low, so it couldn't be that, and just dismissed out of hand. The fact that my weight wasn't quote unquote too low meant that I couldn't possibly be doing anything with exercise or food that was problematic. And same with I went on a thyroid medication and still didn't get my period back. And then it was like, well, could it be gluten? I got on this whole train of thinking that gluten was the problem and that I was, had a subclinical sensitivity or whatever. And had doctors either be like, well, I don't really know why you're not having your period. So yeah, maybe it's gluten. Try cutting it out and see if you feel better. Or just had them kind of throw up their hands and be like, well, I don't know what to do with you. We've done all the tests and everything seems fine. So why aren't you having your period? I'm not really sure, and it was just incredibly frustrating. And I know now, seeing clients who are going through the same thing, how maddening that is as the person going through it, to have doctors be like, well, I can't really tell you what's wrong, but there's this huge missing piece that the doctors don't get and the person suffering doesn't get, which is you're doing some fucked up shit with your food and your exercise because of what you've been told by diet culture, because of these disordered beliefs that you've internalized. And that's what's causing these complications. And instead, you've got doctors now that are like, well, yeah, it probably is gluten. Why don't you try this low FODMAP thing? Why don't you cut out this, and this? Fully exacerbating the eating disorder or the disordered eating, and not even recognizing it, not even seeing that the person's relationship with food is sort of the missing link here. It's just, it's awful.
It's awful. Could have saved so much agony and pain over those years. And I can so empathize with that. Going to the doctors and them not knowing. And then even after my eating disorder, I'm done with that. But because the diet culture perpetuated my other behaviors, right? So I totally got into that era of the low carb. And then it just, even though I wasn't doing quote unquote eating disorder behaviors, I was still engulfed with diet behaviors, which was so normalized. But I was still having all these health issues, but then the doctors would be like, you're fine, everything's fine, testing everything, and you're in a healthy weight range. It was all based on my weight and being them not looking deeper. I mean, so that led me to like kind of working with like a health coach and working with naturopaths who just put me on elimination diets. And I know, and getting into this healthism kind of framework, like, well, you got to eat this way and then this will solve it all. I think because we're in so much pain, we're looking for something to help us feel better. And I think that's what diet culture tries to sell to people too. It's like, well, if you just follow this way, everything is going to be okay. And whether it's for the size of your body or your health, I feel like diet culture finds a way to feed off that fear.
Absolutely. Oh, and so, yeah, how did that play out for you then, getting swept up into that healthism stuff?
I was like, oh my gosh, I think about so much money, so much time, and like, and this was all too back to like the fitness culture thing. I knew I've come from all the diets I had done over the years, like, well, cutting calories and over exercising isn't really working. That doesn't work. So all my energy went towards trying to find the best diet, right? I love when you say diet is the life thief, because man, when you said that a few months ago, I was like, yeah, it totally freaking is. It's insane. But so I was like, okay, I want to look like that person. I don't want to be not eat anymore. I got to find out what they do. So then I found like a health and fitness coach who really, she taught me in a way of eating that still just fed diet culture's rules. So working with the health coach and someone who comes from a very, I've done a lot of work through this, but an anxious temperament, perfectionist personality, when I was told to follow a certain plan to look like, quote unquote, what was in, that you have to eat this way. And it was very much based on like paleo, quote unquote, clean eating and macros and grams. And it was so distracting, but it was also eliminating food. I mean, if you think about all that energy towards like, what am I eating? How much am I eating? It's exhausting. And from there, I was still having tons of stomach issues because no one really dealt with the stress of thinking about food all the time, how it impacts your overall body. So I even like went to like a naturopath, and nothing against naturopaths. Like, man, I think there can be some, and I know you've had people on the podcast who mentioned some wonderful naturopaths, but my experience was just feeding into my disordered behaviors. Oh, just cut out gluten, cut out dairy, cut out soy, do these cleanses. And I wasn't feeling well. And I was afraid to lose that fitness, shape or whatever. So I was like, okay, I have to follow this way. Just these set of rules that you think is going to make you feel better. But ultimately it just created more isolation and more pain and more stress. And if someone would have talked about the relationship with food and how it's impacting how I'm feeling, I think that would have changed how my body was reacting to food and stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I fully identify with that too, because I think the stress of disordered eating, both physical and mental, the stress that it puts on your body and the trauma that it is to the body to be restricted of food like that, it creates digestive issues, and sometimes like the disordered behaviors themselves are creating digestive issues. Sometimes it's what we think of as like quote unquote healthy eating, but we're eating so many vegetables and so much fiber that it's causing like bloating and gas and discomfort and like,
oh my God.
And then it's like, and then you're told like, oh, it must be this, this, and this that you're allergic to, that you're sensitive to. So cut them out. And then you end up eating more foods that are high in fiber and so-called whole plant-based foods that exacerbate the problem even more. And if people could just kind of take a step out of it and be like, did I have any of these digestive issues before I went down this rabbit hole, before I started the clean eating thing or the, whatever it was? I mean, it's very hard to be objective about yourself like that, about your experience, but in hindsight, I can fully see for myself, I didn't have any, significant stomach issues. I certainly had like a nervous stomach and got anxiety, stomach aches and stuff like that as a kid and everything. But I didn't have any reactions to food or anything like that or chronic digestive issues. as an intuitive eater, and I was eating lots of so-called processed foods and like whatever.
Yeah.
And then when I went down the clean eating, proto early days of clean eating before it was even called that rabbit hole, I suddenly had all kinds of digestive issues and also was not eating enough and over exercising and then binging at night and, occasional compensatory behaviors and stuff. Of course, my digestive system was going to be totally screwed up.
Yeah.
And instead of looking at what I was doing before I got into all this stuff, I didn't have any of this. And then suddenly now I do. Like Occam's razor, what's the change here? That's the simple explanation for why all this is happening now. But instead I was like, oh no, it must be gluten, it must be dairy, it must be soy, it must be blah, 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 Instead of realizing like this is just a reaction to the way that I'm eating in an increasingly disordered way.
Yeah, I can so empathize with all of that. If you don't know it when you're in it, because you get so caught up in the rules and then the fear of losing or breaking the rules and different things like that. But when you're outside and can really observe from a different angle, it's kind of overwhelming, like how quickly it can like suck you in, like you said before.
So overwhelming. Yeah. And it sounds like you really got sucked in like that too, where you weren't seeing also that the issue wasn't what you were eating or needing to cut out more foods, but the issue was like how you were relating to food in your body.
Yeah, I think it was tied to too. When I went to college, they were like, oh, you have IBS. That's what it is. And I was like, okay, so there has to be a medical issue. And so I was really, when I worked with the health coach who was helping me quote unquote get fit, and then working with the naturopath to work on my gut issues, then it was like, oh, it all came back to like healing what the doctors had previously told me. But again, not looking at the whole big picture of everything. And how, when you're in it, you're just kind of like trying to put Band-Aids on the symptoms versus looking at from a holistic point of view.
Yeah, and a truly holistic point of view, not the fake holistic point of view that, some of those naturopaths and alternative medicine practitioners do. And of course, there are good ones out there too. But like, I think the watered down mainstream version of holistic now is just like, cut out these foods and you'll take care of yourself. Cut out these foods for your health. And that's not what holistic really is.
Oh, no, not at all. And I think when we're trying to cut out things, again, it just creates this hyper focus on the things that we can't have. And then feeling so much shame if you do have that, or isolation because you can't be around certain people or situations because, quote unquote, it's not clean or going to interfere with your plan.
Yeah, and that steals your life in that way too, right? Because you're isolating yourself from the people that you care about and from situations that you could enjoy and not think about food 24/7, but instead it's food controls your life.
Yeah, and it's so scary you're here, all these people who are supposed to be the ones to listen to, right? Doctors and naturopaths. And at that time, the health coach, you look at them as they should know what they're doing. There's a misconception of doctors knowing it all and health coaches knowing it all and naturopaths knowing it all. Like we're just people and losing touch. Yeah, we're losing touch with, that's where like the intuitive eating, being able to like, we know what we need to eat, but we're so scared because we've followed such external rules for so long that we lose that trust. We lose the ability to know and be like, we're going to be okay. But diet culture again feeds on the fear of not fitting in to our culture based on our size, or this moral obligation towards healthism that this is the way we have to eat. That's the new thing that people are afraid to eat anything processed, which most food is processed. So it's very interesting how it's kind of evolved.
Totally. And these authorities, these outside authorities that claim to know what is best for us, like you said, they're just people. Like they do have training and education and stuff, but also they're steeped in diet culture like the rest of us. Yeah. They're steeped in this healthist rhetoric around, what people should and shouldn't eat, and just as caught up in disordered thinking about food. And to your point about IBS too, I think that's so interesting that you had that reaction like, well, it's a medical diagnosis, so it must be something I'm eating, or I have to get to the root of this. And I think I see that a lot in people too. And I know I had that when I was diagnosed with IBS as well. And it's interesting because IBS is a diagnosis of exclusion. Anything with the word syndrome in it basically is like, like it's likely going to be some sort of diagnosis of exclusion where you don't really know. It doesn't have a mechanical basis. It doesn't have a there's nothing actually wrong with the digestive system, right? There's nothing you can see on an MRI or anything like that. And there's no other gut disorder that has like a really strong clinical criteria that you would fit into. You're not fitting into like Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease, which is very different than IBS, or it's irritable bowel syndrome is like just a catch-all term for someone who doesn't fit into any other category or diagnosis that is actually much more clinically strong basis. Like we know a lot more about Crohn's disease or celiac disease or inflammatory bowel disease than we do about IBS. Like IBS is just like, well, you don't have any of those major things and there's nothing physically wrong with your gut. So you're going to get thrown into this category of IBS where you have something going on, you have symptoms in your gut for unknown reasons, basically.
Yeah. But it's like we trust them. And then when we're in pain, we want people to give us a solution. And I think that's, again, where diet culture or diets like make it so alluring. And yet they still, 90 to 95% of the time fail. But yet we keep doing it because we want to not feel the pain, or we want answers. And we're told to not look inward, to look out.
Yeah. And that's so common and natural, I think, in our culture to fall into that trap, because also people who we're not raised knowing how to trust our instincts and trust our inner wisdom, especially people socialized as women in this culture. We're raised and trained to like be nice and put aside your rage and put aside your reactions, your anxiety about certain people, and get along with everybody and go along with the program and don't make waves. And so it just disconnects us from our inner wisdom that could be so useful in so many contexts, including in our relationship with food and our bodies.
For sure.
So how did it go for you from there then? How did this health coach situation and starting to cut out all these foods unfold for you?
At first, every diet at first seems pretty easy, and it felt like super empowering. Like I'm on my way to fixing how my gut's been, and I'm really looking the way I wanted with the fitness culture. But then, like any diet, at some point I was like, do I always have to eat this quote unquote clean? And after like so long, I was like really starting to question, like, can I do this forever? Do I want to do this forever? And I remember like my 1-year wedding anniversary, that was kind of like a holy crap. I remember talking to her and be like, so can I have cake, or a glass of champagne? And she's like, oh no, because that's processed and all this stuff. I was like, oh my God. And I remember just being like so like conflicted. Like I got at that point, I was scared to eat. I wouldn't consider like being like orthorexic, because I was still focused on changing my body, but definitely had orthorexic behaviors. Like I was just fearful of anything processed, because I've been told by all these people who are quote unquote experts that these foods are quote unquote bad. So that kind of evolved. And then from there, I got pregnant, and that really was an experience where it helped me remember what it was like to be an intuitive eater. It was like the first time I was like, oh, my body physically told me, you cannot eat any more freaking broccoli. Like you cannot eat any more plain grilled chicken. Otherwise you're going to get sick. And I literally, like, my body refused to eat anything whole food, consider whole food, anything.
That's awesome.
I literally, it was like reject. Where is Baskin Robbins? I want Mexican bean cheese burritos. It was awesome. And it wasn't, people sometimes, just let it go when you're pregnant. I think it was my body's, knowing what I know now, it was my body's just way of trying to refeed itself, to feed my child and to really know what I want and to trust it. And so that was a wonderful experience to have. But then I still was in disordered eating after pregnancy, because I think there's so much pressure for women to lose their baby weight right away and all that kind of stuff. So still definitely swept up in the diet culture and fitness culture. But I really think that experience plus my childhood helped me move out of it quicker.
Right. Because you had that sort of moment of like reconnecting with your intuitive eating from the past and being like, oh, right, this is possible.
Yeah. After pregnancy, and like, yes, it is possible. But after pregnancy, I definitely was not ready to go back to the quote unquote clean eating. I was like, I just can't just only eat vegetables and lean meats and yams, even though I love them now. But like, I couldn't. I was like, I can't do it anymore.
So sick of them. Yeah, I'm sure.
So sick of them. And now it's exciting that I kind of like some of those foods again. But it took a long time. But that led to me learning about really getting into the fitness world for a few years. Because again, we always are, there's so many different diets. And we're like, this one's not working. So what's the next one? And so I learned about, which is just another way of like counting calories. But in the fitness world, it is really big. So fitness before, when I told you, like initially was just about reducing your calories and over exercising or whatever. And now the fitness culture is more about like manipulating your macros and eating. It sells to people right now because it's like you can eat all type of foods as long as you track every freaking thing, including your broccoli.
Right.
Yeah, I won't go in like details, but it's very calculated what you eat before you work out, after you work out. But it was all like you could have, and it sells, you can have Pop-Tarts and still be lean. And so that was a part I was like, oh, I know. But in a way, like it helped me move out of like the quote unquote clean eating and to be able to like have foods I wanted. But I guess, again, it was like so controlled. And when you're in it, you don't realize how consuming it is. And also too, the fitness culture, when you're in that world, just like any diet, I feel like it's a sense of community. And there in the fitness culture world, it is, even though I never did bodybuilding, because I just cannot ever imagine doing that. But I definitely trained, and no, nothing against people who do. I personally couldn't. I definitely trained like that. And so it felt like, oh, this is the one. This is the one where you can eat all the food you want. And it doesn't have to, you can eat whole foods or play foods and you'll still be fit, right? Quote, unquote, fit. I'm using a lot of quote, unquotes.
Yeah, I do that too.
But because I feel like there's a lot of quote, unquotes. But that felt like, oh, this is the one. And again, like any other diet, I got to a point where I knew that this wasn't. I'm like, if this isn't right, then what is? Because I started I'm a part-time been a school counselor for 11 years, but I went part-time when I had my daughter. And then when I was, again, because I was so into diet culture, I was like, oh, when I found that type of framework, I'm like, I have to help other people do this. I know it's horrible. I feel so bad for the clients I work with, but I felt like this was the way that people can eat all the things that they want to and work out less. Like that was like my thing. Eat more, work out less. And I felt like because of my previously eating disorder and disordered eating, I thought this would be helpful for people because you're not having to work out a ton and you could eat so much more food. But when I started working with clients, I found out like because I had been doing it so long and tracking my food and my grams, and it seemed easy for me, but you forget how anxiety provoking it is and how isolating it is. So when I started working with clients, I just knew I couldn't do it anymore because I could see they would be like, I have to track my broccoli. It's like, yeah. And it just seemed so awful. And luckily I didn't do that very long. Yeah, not very long at all because I couldn't keep doing it.
Yeah. What did it feel like to see people go through that?
It felt like I could feel so much of their pain and so much of their anxiety and shame that I knew here I am thinking I want to be helping people because I thought it helped me. But then hearing their struggle and hearing like moms who, have to take care of kids and have to go to work full time. At the time I had summers off, so I'd see, had more flexibility in the summer, and working with clients or students going to college, like life is really stressful. And for them to have to stop and like micromanage everything, it was just seemed so absurd to be having people do that, all in the hope of losing body fat. It wasn't about weight and losing body fat now.
Right. Quote unquote lean.
Yeah. They're wanting to feel a certain way in their body. And yet I'm creating so much more turmoil in their life. And I felt so incongruent with me. And then I was like, oh, so what do I do now? But yeah, it was not something I felt like. Obviously, we all have our own experiences, and I knew there was something. This has always been so much of my life. I knew I wanted to be something with helping. That's like kind of I feel like my nature. And so I thought this was a way to involve both of my, my passions with, at the time, like fitness and food and stuff. I thought this was the way, but like, oh my gosh, it's funny looking back. Not funny, but you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Just like,
I mean, I feel you on that too, because I definitely was attracted to a career as a dietitian for the same disordered reasons. Like, I can help people be healthy and reverse the quote unquote obesity epidemic. And it's like, oh God, what was I? Oof, disordered behaviors that I was teaching people,
Right.
And we all go through that as health professionals.
Yeah. And we have to show ourselves compassion. I have to check myself. And, we don't know until we know. And I think the one thing I really love about people sharing their journeys on your podcast, or even you disclosing so much, is that being open. Like even now, I would say this is where I am, like in my beliefs and my core values and principles, but I am still open. Like things change as we learn. And I think that's a part of human nature, that we can't be like black and white, that we have to have gray, and be open to listening to people's stories and being open to thinking critically to help kind of guide like what is our purpose in the work we're doing, and like what kind of life we want to have, and in the present and in the future too,
Yeah, that's so well said. And it sounds like your experience as a therapist and school counselor has sort of informed that also, like that wisdom and compassion for your clients when you were doing the fitness coaching helped you recognize like, okay, this is not feeling good. This is not feeling congruent with my values or my desire to help people. And I think that's such a useful intuition to have as you move forward, because I'm sure, and I've felt this and experienced this too, where like some things that I tried to express or tried to do to help people really didn't resonate or land with them. And then I had to sort of feel, okay, that doesn't feel good. I feel like I'm out of alignment with my desire to help people when I'm delivering a message that is driving them in this weird direction that I didn't intend. And so how can I try to create a career and a life that is more congruent with my values, and what would that look like? And just kind of trying to keep pushing forward in that way, so that as time goes on, hopefully I'll just become more and more inclusive and able to truly help people and truly support people who want support on whatever their journey is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of a learning experience for all of us. And especially when you're raised in diet culture, and when so many of us struggle ourselves and are attracted to the field because of that, of course, it's going to take us time to move out of it and to recognize like, oh crap, like that thing that I was doing back there was not helping people actually.
Yeah. I think like looking internally and integrating things that are important to us and be able to listen to that and honor it, so that we can do the things that we think are valuable.
Yeah. What did it look like for you then when you had that experience of recognizing like, oh crap, this is not helping, this counting and tracking situation that I'm trying to teach people to do is actually causing them pain? Where did you go from there?
It was actually interesting. So when I launched that service, another therapist like reached out, and she was one who sold, I don't know if you ever heard, it's awful. Anyways, it's some type of thing. And she's like, you should get licensed as a therapist, because I've been a school counselor, and all I needed was my hours to be a therapist. And I was like, okay. And I stopped like coaching people, and I was like, well, it kind of opened up a door. I'm like, I know I want to help people, and I feel like I'm onto something. Let me kind of explore that. And luckily I found a supervisor when I told her what I've been kind of doing, what I'm hoping, and being like, I want to help people not try to lose weight all the time. Like I knew that's what I wanted. I wanted people to feel accepting of their bodies. I knew I was at that place. At that time, also, when I started coaching, I actually stopped tracking too. Like that was a couple years ago now. I was like, I can't do this. Like, I didn't know what to do. I just knew I didn't want to do that anymore. But anyways, I found this supervisor, and she telling her what I wanted to do. I just didn't know what that would look like, what it is. And she looked at me and she's like, I want you to read Health at Every Size and Intuitive Eating. And when I read those books, it just, I know I've heard this on your podcast before, my mind was freaking blown. I was like, oh, what the hell? Like, this has been here the whole time. I was like, I resonated with it, I guess, back because I just didn't know for so long. I mean, with the eating disorder and disordered eating, it was probably like, 10 to 12 years of my life. So you forget, like, people don't diet. You forget that you don't have to follow a plan and that you can eat foods that you want and connect with your body, and that it's again, this is not, like you said, not a hunger and fullness diet, but it's very much like having the full permission without trying to have a certain outcome of what your body would look like. It was just totally so different from what I had thought for so many years, but it felt so familiar.
Yeah, so you kind of remembered that from childhood probably, and maybe from your pregnancy experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I read that stuff, I said, oh, this is what I have to do. And from then, it was funny. I was looking, because literally, the diet, like, diets are your life thief. Like, literally, I've been a school counselor, and I feel like I love working in the schools. But to be honest, primarily, my energy at the school was like when I started and then when I left. But after the work hours, it was so focused on fitness and food and all those things. But when I found intuitive eating and Health at Every Size, I knew that was what I wanted to put my energy towards. And that's when I actually found your podcast a couple years ago. And that really helped me steer the way and like learning, like, I need to learn more about this. And that led me to doing the intuitive eating certification and then also the eating disorder program at Lewis and Clark. So it just kind of like, as soon as I think because of like my story, once I heard about this movement and heard about honoring what your body is telling you, I was all in. Obviously, with anybody, at least in my experience, like, getting outside support was super helpful, and working with a therapist on, like, because it's all those years of dieting, it's really hard to kind of reject that and look at it from another angle.
Yeah, there's so much nuance to it. I totally had that experience myself where, like, I read the book Intuitive Eating. It totally clicked. I was like, this is what I already did as a kid to be able to, like, be peaceful with food, and it makes so much sense, and this is what I need to do again. But then the actual practice of letting go of all the dieting behaviors and thoughts and the little vestiges of the diet mentality that are still hanging on, and not getting sucked back into diet culture and all the sneaky ways, like, that's what I think requires so much additional support and just like reinforcement.
And it's so important to, I think, as a therapist and as a dietitian or health coach, to do the work yourself so that you can be fully present when your clients may be going through similar things or different experiences, to be able to be so attuned with your client and have knowing that you've gone through similar things, and to be able to show empathy and to really be present for the pain that it takes to kind of give up dieting and to recreate a relationship with your own body and food, and knowing the ambivalence that comes up with letting go of that thing we've done for so long.
Yeah, because it is ambivalence. Like, even though it can be so inspiring to find a new way and to be like, yes, I want this. It's tough to give up those long-standing behaviors and habits because they've really become habits. And it's like, you can be all inspired to be an intuitive eater and to embrace the principles of health at every size. But then you're like, oh shit, what do I eat for lunch? Like, it's these day-to-day decisions that are really challenging.
Like relearning how to drive, like you said before, like driving a car. Like, I like telling my clients, which I think I have to come with a new analogy because not a lot of people drive stick shifts very much. But I like the stick shift analogy. It's like when you get in the car, you got to push in the clutch and go in first gear, and then sometimes we're going to stall and have to go back into first gear and then push in our clutch, and that can be very exhausting for clients too, to have to like initially pay so much attention to it because all they're wanting is to not, for the most part. But once you can reconnect, I feel like that healing can begin, and then we can start doing the other work.
Right. And it does become easier over time. I think that's one of the things that can give people some hope, because it does feel so hard at the beginning. You have to think about every aspect. You have to be like, okay, push the clutch, move the thing. Like, I often say, like, when you're first driving, even an automatic, you're like holding the wheel and you're like, okay, hands at 10 and 2, and like put the signal on, check the rear view mirror, check the side view mirror, check the blind spot, check the rear view, and it's like, oh, you have to think about it so much. But then once you get it, once you click in with it, and you're just like driving down the highway, talking to someone and listening to a podcast and changing lanes, like it's no big deal.
Right. Yeah. I also want to mention like the work that I have my own practice and I'm working with clients. Like I'm still working at the school. I don't see kids in my private practice yet, because I have a 2 and 4-year-old at home, and I don't know how many little kids I can be around all the time. But I'm grateful for finding intuitive eating and health at every size and all these wonderful people I work with, because it has helped me have a different lens and how, when talking to kids, and how I hear them speak about their bodies and their relationship with food, and how it is. I work at an elementary school, and I think it is super prevalent to have these discussions at a younger age, that I'm realizing like I didn't have that. So I would never thought about that, but as we evolve and learn, I can really hear the stuff. And now it's really amazing to be able to have those conversations in a school and with parents and potentially a larger mass of the school districts.
Yeah, that must be so interesting. And what are you seeing like in kids at that age in terms of diet culture and disordered beliefs about food that show up? I would imagine, since you're in kind of a progressive area, right, like the Portland area, there's probably a lot of that clean eating BS flying around.
Yeah, the school I work at is like a little bit north. I live in Portland, but my business and the school's in Vancouver, but still all very the same. It is very much so. Now it's hearing so many requests that it has to be gluten-free and dairy-free and sugar-free and like every other free.
Yeah.
Yeah, like free everything. And like certain hand sanitizers. Like there's so much healthism in the schools. But from a counseling point of view, I mean, there's just been more situations, especially in the last year, where my ears are kind of like gone on fire hearing conversations. Like I go in the cafeteria in the morning with the kids, and I'm sitting with a bunch of 5 and 6-year-olds, and a girl's talking about how she loves something she's eating. And she's like, but I can't eat this all the time. I'm like, oh, how come? She's like, well, I don't want to get fat. And I don't mean that in like a negative way. It was just her experience. And we're talking, and I'm like, oh, and remember when we teach lessons, all bodies there's people who are tall, there's people who are larger, there's people who are different colors, like trying to like normalize. She's like, yeah, but I still don't want to be like that. And this is a 5-year-old. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I was like one experience this year. And then I was doing a friendship group with some 9-year-old girls, and we were just working on like friendship skills. And all of a sudden they start poking at their stomachs and putting their bodies down, like, oh, I've gained weight, or I weighed myself and I've lost weight, but I don't want to gain it back. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like these are 9-year-old girls. And then there's girls in smaller bodies, and there's other girls in larger bodies. And you could see how it affects all of them, but, especially the girls in the larger body, I could see the shame and like, I don't want to talk about this stuff. So I think that it's something we don't really pay attention to, or we just kind of like, oh, they're just elementary kids. But I think more and more so it's starting at a younger age, because the students are hearing it from their parents. And no judgment to parents, because it's what they grew up with. We're all in diet culture, right? And like no judgment towards that. But the messages we say really do impact, even if it's like, there's so much more learn from our body language, our facial expressions, and actually the words we say. So we can say, oh, it's okay to eat that food. But then when we don't eat it ourselves, or we like grab our stomach, like, oh, I'm being so bad, or those subliminal messages really impact those kids, because they're so aware of those nonverbal comments or emotions and all that kind of stuff, if that makes sense.
Oh my God, totally. Yeah, kids pick up so much. They're like little sponges, and they're going to parrot what they hear their parents saying and older kids and other siblings and stuff saying. So yeah, I think that's how diet culture gets disseminated. It's really been a short time that it's existed in the grand scheme of things. It's only like 150 years, but that's several generations that were instilled, inculcated in it and then passed it down to their kids. And then those kids passed it down to their kids and so on. And it's like every generation, it just gets more entrenched and, it becomes a sort of psychological thing instead of just a sociocultural thing, because now it's coming from your family of origin. And of course, it's going to feel so important and real when that message is coming from your parents as a kid.
Because what they know. And kids look at their teachers as they're the be-all, know-all too. Like kids, they're so influenced by what we say, especially because, I can say the same thing to a child that their parents do, but they're more likely to listen to me sometimes. I think that's very common because sometimes we don't want to believe everything our parents say, but I can say the same thing. And teachers, like they're with the kids more than their parents are in the school year. And I really try to pay attention to January when so many teachers were on their diets, doing Weight Watchers or the new keto and the keto, all these different diets. And I could watching, I just wanted to observe, because I've been there too. And again, no judgment, but I just wanted to watch like teachers are coming in January. They're so excited. They're so excited about their new diet. They're all talking about it in the lunchroom. And the kids are hearing it, like I'm on a diet, and they're hearing I need to lose weight. They're hearing that my body's not okay. All ranges, right? Because it affects everybody. I have teachers who are in really small bodies and teachers who are in larger bodies, and they're hearing women in really smaller bodies being like, oh God, I'm so gross, all that kind of stuff. But then it kind of cycles to when, give it a month, maybe a week even, when the diets ultimately don't work, then I see the mood change in teachers. And this is not like to be like it's all teachers' fault or all parents' fault. I'm just saying it's something that we need to do something more about educating that language, how it just can have such a negative impact on our students. Because when because if teachers are they're upset, they're feeling shame because the diet didn't work. And then they come to school and they're like, right, when we feel bad about ourselves, most people are either going to, I say, that's what I teach kids and I teach the adults, but we kind of go into this blue zone, like this hypoarousal, like we kind of get sad or withdrawn. So some teachers might respond that way because the diet didn't work, or go into this hyperarousal, like this, I call it like the red zone, like more irritated, like they're not feeding themselves, right? Then they're frustrated because the weight's not coming off, or maybe because they started binging and then they're on their planet again. So I think that all full circle affects not only the interpretation of what is the best way to eat for kids or the need to lose weight, but also the energy in the classroom and to the kids to get the best experience when they're at school. I think dieting really impacts how teachers are feeling about themselves and taking care of their body and feeding it, nourishing it in a way that they can be their best selves, because that's a lot of work in elementary school. To be with like 25 kids, I could never do it. Like be a teacher. Like, thank you, teachers. I about to say, like, they are amazing. They are so amazing. But we could be even more amazing if we took care of our bodies better and we're not so focused on trying to change it, so we can really be present with the students and ourselves.
So well said. And that's such an important point, because diet culture, that's another way in which it's the life thief. It steals your ability to be present with people and be a good role model for kids in your life, or do your job effectively and really enjoy your job and be in it, and as opposed to kind of having your wheels spinning on something else and feeling bad about yourself all the time. And like, that is another way in which diet culture just gets transmitted to kids. I can totally remember hearing adults in my life, including teachers, saying negative things about their bodies or talking about diets. And that was part of what built the framework of the house of diet culture that then was able to kind of lead down the path of disordered eating later.
Right.
And it's only gotten worse now.
Yeah. Because again, like you said before in other podcasts, now it's like, I'm not dieting. I'm just trying to be healthy. And I'm just cutting out all the bad, all this quote unquote bad food because I more care about my health. With there's just totally the weight is so there with it, but we can use this health word as a way to not make the weight loss the number one drive to do things, but it's still there.
Yeah, it's this subtle undercurrent. It's like people, of course, still want to lose weight, and that's supposed to be a side effect of just quote unquote getting healthier, but it's still part of the promise of any of these healthist kind of approaches to food.
Mm-hmm. And kids are picking up on it. They're like, oh, I was so good today. Or I'm going to eat really good this weekend. Or I'm being so bad. They'll come to my office like I always have candy. I have all different types of food in there. And like, can I eat all these? Can I have some Starburst? I'm being so bad. And I'm like, oh, and I try to like re-educate them on that and have different kind of conversations. Obviously, I have to talk to parents in a school setting, but it just gives me another opportunity to plant a little seed, I feel like.
That's great. That's really important to be able to do that. And like you're in such a good position, I bet, in being able to work in the schools to sort of be on the front lines of that stuff and help make a change in people's lives. When I think diet culture is just so insidious that people don't see it and they don't notice how much it harms their kids, how much it harms them. And so to have you there, just being able to be like, actually, foods aren't good or bad. And actually, you're not being bad when you eat this. You're just enjoying yourself. And pleasure is a normal part of any relationship with food. And that's a good thing. It's like, I'm sure that just blows some kids' minds in a really good way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love when some of the kids I've worked with are like, yeah, that's kind of messed up. Why do people like this? You can see them like just that little switch, just even if it's something like a little critical thought like that, I don't have to think this way. Oh, my body's okay the way it is. It's really rewarding. I mean, I thought about even because I'm super passionate about this work. And I mean, that's why I started the practice. But I even thought about people had asked me like, are you going to leave the schools and just do solo private practice? And where I am right now, I mean, with my kids, but I feel like the reason I got into the schools is because it was for prevention and to be proactive. And especially with everything that's happening in our society and how it's just feel like it's gotten so much worse. I feel like there needs to be some people in the school to say it's not okay, that when they're showing certain presentations on eating a certain way, to say that's actually not okay and kind of have those conversations that may be difficult, but also I feel like extremely important. I feel like the more people we can get to talk to the schools, and my hope would be to limit the number of students, boys, girls, all genders, from feeling like their body is not good enough based on cultural standards. This is, I think, really important. So
that's awesome. And I think that's such a good mission because I wish every school had somebody, at least one person, but hopefully I definitely know a lot of people listening to the podcast and people in my intuitive eating course and stuff are teachers. Like I've worked with a number of teachers.
Oh, that's awesome.
Private clients too. So like, I think that like people in the helping professions generally, which I would include teachers in that, like I think, and school counselors and stuff too, like I think folks in that arena just have some curiosity and desire to help people that often does lead them to the sort of intuition that you had where it was like, I can tell that this is not helping people when I'm giving them these tracking assignments or whatever. And like, what can I do differently? Like,
yeah,
I think there's a certain self-awareness that comes with being a helping person where you do notice those things and you're like, okay, well, clearly that didn't work. Like what is going to work? And so I think the more teachers and, people in the schools that can come to this field in this arena and do some work to advocate for an intuitive eating and health at every size model instead of the bullshit like BMI report cards and good and bad food discussions where certain foods are demonized and others are elevated. And just put a voice of reason in the mix and maybe even make some change at the policy level, whether that's a school district-wide thing, whether that's just with the individual school, where the way that they're teaching nutrition and movement and stuff is coming from whoever is setting that curriculum. Like if you can get involved in that level and start to make change there, like I think that's where some real magic will happen. We can just take away some of that poisonous language and rhetoric around bodies.
Yeah, I think you made such a good point too, though. It's like people in the education, they are in the helping profession. Like, I don't know if I've met any teacher or person who's worked in the school district who doesn't want to help improve family situations or help their students. And if they knew it was causing harm, I know they wouldn't do it. I think that's just the point of, like you were saying, like talking to the bigger system, the school wide and all those different things to hopefully create change. That's what I met with the school district, and me and a couple dietitians. They're great, Julie Bowman and Catherine Jeffcoat. In Portland, there's so many amazing therapists and RDs here in this movement. I can't even wrap my head around it. I'm so fortunate. I mean, working with some wonderful supervisors, but we are going to be hopefully meeting with like Vancouver School District and Evergreen School District. We're trying to get like nurses, PE teachers, we have to get them to come because there's a lot of other options for them. But I really am hoping that we can kind of plant seeds. And like, I listened to one of your podcasts and I appreciated I don't know you were talking about your debate, and she was saying less about the statistics and more about connecting with people's experiences.
Yeah, that was Elizabeth Scott. I really love that episode too.
Yeah, that was great. It made me really think about, I can spout out all the statistics on health at every size and weight stigma and weight bias and how it is just really impacts everybody. But I think one thing I took from that is really making sure when we are speaking to all these educators that relating to their experience. And if they know the pain they've gone through, that they're not going to want to do that to the students that they influence so much.
Yeah, connecting it to real people and to stories and evoking empathy instead of spouting off science and numbers. Because even with people who care about that stuff, it doesn't really get to the heart of the matter, which is that it is the effect on people.
Right. Yeah. So I'm hoping that will be another foot in the door to have people think differently about dieting and the language that we say around, the students, and also how they speak to themselves and their family. It's just not something, I think it's really grown, like our movement. I feel like I'm just around people all the time, like this is how it is, but I forget that I get in my bubble that it's still so big out there. And so that's why I'm like so grateful for your podcast, because with 2 little kids and where I am in my career, like I don't have the space or the ability to do a lot of the work that so many people are doing, like you and Hillary from Be Nourished, and all these people who are really speaking out and advocating for these social justice things. So I feel like this is my like one little piece. I'm really gonna help with this, but I feel like if all of us do something and take a part in some way, it's going to spread to more people. And I really feel like it is growing.
Absolutely. And yeah, we all have our ways of helping. Like we all have our talents and our gifts that we can bring to this movement. And like what you're doing is so amazing. Like I don't have access to that system like you do. And so the fact that you and those dietitians can like go in there and speak to the folks who have the power to really influence kids in the school system and could make a really positive difference or a really negative difference, in kids' lives. The fact that you can speak to them, I think is so amazing. So I think, yeah, we're all doing our part, but that's so cool what you're doing. And I feel like your kids in your school system are lucky to have you.
Oh, thanks so much. I mean, I feel like it's a great opportunity, and it's a really nice balance to be able to speak to all the educators and also working with kids and then my private practice. It feels like it's a really nice balance.
Yeah, totally. It's like meeting all the different needs. Speaking of which, tell us about your private practice and how people can learn more about that and work with you.
Yeah, so I have a private practice actually in Vancouver, Washington. It's north of Portland, just not too far, a few miles up. And then I can see clients online in Washington and Oregon. And I'm currently in the process of getting my license in Idaho, so I can see clients online there too. I only see a handful of clients. And so when I get to it, something definitely doesn't feel like work. It's something that I'm very passionate about. And I love having that, because in a school, it's so busy. I mean, it's really limited to have such a connected experience for a longer period of time. So to have that space is really rewarding. So yeah, that's it. It's in Vancouver. It's awesome. You can find me. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Haven't been on a ton, but I plan to be on it more. So you can find me there. My website is christineyoshida.com. And my email, everything's Christine Yoshida, my Instagram too.
Awesome. We'll put links to that in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you and learn more. And thank you so much for being here. It's such a joy to talk with you.
Oh, no, it's been so much fun. Thank you, Christy.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to Christine Yoshida for joining us on this episode, and thanks to you for listening. If you're looking for some practical tips to get started on your own anti-diet journey, grab my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. Head over to christyharrison.com/strategies to get it. That's christyharrison.com/strategies. If you've gotten something out of this podcast, please help us reach more people who need to hear these messages, because who doesn't in diet culture? And you can do that by sharing this episode on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or your favorite podcast platform. You can also leave us a nice rating and review in your podcast provider of choice, which is another way to help new listeners discover us and is always so much appreciated. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we mentioned, plus a full transcript, head over to christyharrison.com/169. That's christyharrison.com/169. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. This episode was brought to you by my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. If you're ready to make peace with food, become an intuitive eater, and break free from the prison of diet culture, learn more and sign up at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. A big thanks, as always, to our editor and sound engineer, Mike Lalonde, our community and content associate, Vinci Chue, and our administrative assistant, Julianne Watasik, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show every week. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Melissa Alam. Our theme song was written and performed by Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs. And I'm your host and producer, Christy Harrison. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.